Hi, my name is Theresa Cruz. I'm a program officer at the National Center for Medical Rehabilitation Research at the National Institute of Child Health and Human Development at the National Institutes of Health. I'd like to thank the Project Empowerment team for inviting me here today to talk to you about grant opportunities for minority researchers from the National Institutes of Health. So what is NIH? The National Institutes, plural, of Health is the premier biomedical and behavioral research agency in the country. And our mission is to seek fundamental knowledge about the nature and behavior of living systems and to apply that knowledge to reduce the burden of illness and disability. We have a budget of approximately $30 billion, and of that, 80% is awarded in the form of grants and contracts to the extramural community. That's you, okay? But keep in mind that we are the National Institutes of Health, so we are made up of 27 separate institutes and centers, plus the Office of the Director. And each of these institutes and centers has its own mission, its own goals, and its own budget. So when you're thinking about applying to NIH, you have to have a home for your application. So it's not enough just to have a really great scientific application. You need to align yourself with one of the 27 institutes. Now, if you're interested in doing research on disabilities and rehabilitation, there are several homes for your application at NIH. One is the National Center for Medical Rehabilitation Research, NCMRR, and that's where I work. And our mission is to foster development of scientific knowledge needed to enhance the health, productivity, independence, and quality of life for people with disabilities. We are not one of the 27 separate ICs. So we are located in NICHD, the Eunice Kennedy Shriver National Institute of Child Health and Human Development. So if you're looking to apply to NCMRR, you have to look under NICHD. Now there are many homes for rehab and disability research at NIH because it is such a broad, cross-cutting issue. Other homes include NINDS, which is the National Institute of Neurological Disease and Stroke, NIAMS, National Institute of Arthritis and Musculoskeletal Disease, NIA, National Institute on Aging, NINR, National Institute on Nursing Research, National Institute of Deafness and Other Communication Diseases, National Institute of Biomedical Imaging and Bioengineering, National Institute of Minority Health and Health Disparities, National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute, etc. So there are many homes, and it's up to the applicant to find which of these institutes best align with their research goals. So today I want to talk to you about how you apply to NIH. And when you apply to NIH, you're applying for a specific grant mechanism. The major grant mechanism used by NIH researchers is the Research Project Award, or the R01. Okay, these are the bread and butter of NIH. The majority of basic and clinical funding comes through these awards, and this should be the goal of any researcher who wants to have a career funded by NIH. Okay, everyone should be aiming for the R01 award. It's usually investigator initiated, so the field comes in with their ideas because you know what research is needed best. You're out there, you're working in the research field. These grants are focused on a specific set of aims. They're usually 4 to 5 years, and they're usually 3 to 5 aims. There's no specific budget limit. However, they're generally in the $150,000 to $250,000 a year direct cost. If you need more than $500,000 in direct costs in any year, you need to contact Program before you submit to get permission, but we certainly want you to ask for the budget that is necessary to do the research. These are renewable awards, meaning after your 4 or 5 year period, you can resubmit a renewal application. And we have some R01s that have been going on for 40 plus years. Preliminary data is absolutely required. And the more preliminary data you can provide, the more you can convince the study section, your peer reviewers who are looking at this application, that you can do the work and that your hypotheses bear investigating. Now, it would be very remiss of me to discuss R01 grant applications in the context of minority researchers without mentioning this article written by Ginther et al., Race, Ethnicity, and NIH Research Awards. This was an NIH-sanctioned study. The final author, Raynard Kington, was the deputy director of NIH and acting director of NIH for some time. And this report investigated the application success rate, the probability of getting an R01 funded from applications submitted from 2000 to 2006. And after they controlled for education, the principal investigator's country of origin, their training, previous funding, publications, employer, everything that they could control for, they found that their African American or Black applicants were 10 percentage points less likely to receive their R01. And when they dug a bit deeper to find out where this discrepancy was occurring, they found that it was occurring at the level of the peer review. Okay, so something was going on at peer review that these applications are not being funded at the same success rate. So how does that shake out in terms of the amount of funding of African American or Black investigators? So fewer than 2% of NIH PIs are identified as Black or African American, and that is lower than the percentage of faculty at medical schools, around 2.9%, and that is much lower than the percentage of the general population at 10.2%. And we found that the same trend holds true for Hispanics, although it wasn't quite as severe. It also, they also found out that the number of applications submitted by Black and African American researchers is very small. Only 1% of the basic science grants were submitted by Black or African American researchers. A little more in clinical and applied at 1.5%, and slightly more again, 3% in behavioral grants. But the basic science grant is the major proportion of NIH grants, and only a very small percentage of those are being submitted by Blacks and African Americans. So clearly we have a huge pipeline issue that we're not getting the number of applications in that we want, and we're not getting the success rate in those applications as high as it should be. So what was the NIH response? Accompanying this article was a essay by Larry Tabak. Dr. Tabak is the NIH Deputy Director, and Dr. Francis Collins, who is the NIH Director. And they articulated that NIH was very disturbed and very upset by this finding. We have a very difficult mission in improving the health and well-being of people, and we're clearly not doing our job if we are not funding applicants in diverse fields and diverse backgrounds. And the disparities that this report found tell us that we're not doing our job in funding the best researchers available. So as part of the NIH response, we've done several things. First, 2 high-level working groups were formed, one extramural that advises the NIH director, and I'll talk a bit about their report. One is from within NIH. We're expanding the early career reviewer program. So one thing that the paper found was that applicants who had had previous experience on a peer review panel did better, had a higher probability of getting their application funded. But generally, people who haven't gotten R01s are not selected to be reviewers. So here we're allowing people without the R01 to come in and serve on a review panel and see what it's like. And hopefully this will increase the success rate there. We're also improving our outreach to academic institutions. This is not just an NIH problem. We clearly need to engage in the academic community more. We believe mentoring in both grant writing as well as in getting people to resubmit. The article found that Blacks and African Americans were much less likely to resubmit an application. We need to be reaching out to those applicants. And then of course we have to look for bias in our peer review system. We are conducting studies to see if there is an unconscious or blatant bias in peer review. We certainly hope this isn't the case, but it is certainly a possibility and we need to investigate. We've requested information from the community in the form of RFIs. And to continue, in June of this year, the Working Group on Diversity in the Biomedical Research Workforce, who is the external group that advises Dr. Collins, issued their report. And the first thing they found was that there was a major leak in the pipeline. So the ratio of Ph.D.s to bachelor's degrees in African Americans was significantly lower than in other racial groups, and particularly in the biological sciences, chemistry, and physics. Okay, so we're losing a lot of talent in our pipeline. This working group made a number of recommendations to Dr. Collins, and he's currently working through these recommendations now. But the group found that NIH needs to do a much better job in data collection and evaluation. We need to track our trainees better, and we need to follow up with all of our trainees better. They suggested an increase in mentoring and career preparation and retention. They suggested that we provide more institutional support to minority-serving institutions who are doing a good job of recruiting and retaining graduate and faculty in biomedical and behavioral sciences. They stressed that we need to continue to look at the bias factor in our review. And finally, they emphasized that NIH itself needs to have a diversity strategy and infrastructure. But I'd like to emphasize that NIH cannot solve this issue alone. This is more than we can do, and we need to reach out to the academic community. We need to look back in the pipeline and really identify people to foster biomedical and behavioral research careers. Okay, so thank you for allowing me to take that tangent, and I'll now return back to the funding mechanisms for NIH applications. So while I said that we're all looking for people to get R01s, obviously most researchers do not start at NIH with an R01. So we have many other grant mechanisms that are designed to cater to both the size of the grant needed as well as the period in the researcher's career. So two of the smaller grant mechanisms are the R03, and this is a pilot study grant. So it provides $50,000 a year for 2 years in direct costs, and it really gives a researcher an opportunity to get their foot in the door at NIH, to collect some pilot data, and then come back later for their R01. Another smaller grant is the R21, and this is really for your high-risk, high-reward research. This is supposed to be very innovative, very cutting edge. It's for $275,000 direct costs spread over 2 years. For these mechanisms, preliminary data is not strictly required, but it is beneficial to put in your application. These are not renewable like the R01 is, and they are not meant to supplement already funded grants. Another grant mechanism is the AREA R15, which is the Academic Research Enhancement Award. And the purpose of these grants are really to engage undergraduates and graduate students in research at institutions that do not typically get a lot of NIH funding. So only institutions that receive less than $6 million a year in 4 of the last 7 years qualify for the AREA award. And again, the goal is to do good research, but it's also to engage students. And here we are talking about continuing the pipeline. Okay. The next type of award is very popular in the rehabilitation and disability field because it relates to small businesses, and assistive technologies are often developed and brought to market by small businesses. So here we have the SBIR, STTR mechanisms, and these were reauthorized in December of 2011. So there are some changes to the program, and some of these changes are still being worked out at present. So if you're looking to apply for a small business grant, please contact your program officer and keep informed of the changes on the NIH website. But basically, this is a 3-phase program. In phase 1, you have $150,000 direct for 6 months to a year, depending on the mechanism, to do your basic research and development, build a prototype, test your idea. Is this feasible? And then in phase 2, which is up to $1 million for 2 years, you do your extensive R&D. And phase 3 is the commercialization process, and that you do on your own, independent of NIH funding. The SBIR and the STTR awards are all given to the small business, although collaboration with academic institutions is encouraged or allowed in the SBIR and required in the STTR. And these are congressionally mandated programs of a percentage of the NIH budget needs to go to small businesses. So previously I'd been talking about RPGs, so research project grants. Now I'm going to shift and I'm going to talk a little bit about career development awards. So I said that NIH has a wide range of mechanisms, and these mechanisms are, or these awards, the K series, are for the development of a researcher as an independent researcher. And the idea here is that for young faculty starting out, these provide protected time when they can focus on their research in biomedical, behavioral, or clinical sciences. And you really become an expert during these mentored awards. Depending on the type of background that the researcher has, as well as the type of research they're doing, there are several different mechanisms, so I'm not going to talk about them all today. Each institute supports select numbers of them, so if you're thinking about applying for a K award, I highly encourage you to talk to your program officer or to go to the K kiosk at the NIH website, and it's very helpful in determining which award would be good for you. I do want to, however, point out a special mechanism in the K series, which is the K99R00, sometimes known as the Kangaroo Award. And this is a little special because it is targeted to postdocs, the very best postdocs out there. And in that postdoc period, it provides 1 or 2 years of mentored support, similar to the other K awards. However, years 3 through 5 are equivalent to a small R01. So the R00 phase, the researcher transitions to a independent tenure track faculty position, usually at a different institution, and they have some seed money. They already have research funding to continue, so that makes them highly sought after when they're looking for their academic research positions. So the mechanisms that I've been talking about are for anyone. They are not specific for minority researchers. But I would like to talk about the programs that NIH has that are geared towards increasing the number of underrepresented minorities in the biomedical and behavioral fields. Okay. The first group are what I call NIH-wide. So many of the 27 institutes and centers participate in these mechanisms. You still need to check and make sure that the institute you're applying for does support these mechanisms, but generally they are supported by all. And again, the goal of all these efforts is to increase the number of underrepresented minorities in the field of biomedical sciences. So the first is the NRSA, which is the National Research Service Award, for predoctoral fellowships to promote diversity and health-related research. This is generally known as the Diversity F31. And an underrepresented minority is identified by the National Science Foundation as African American or Black, Hispanic, Native American, Alaska Native, or a U.S. Pacific Islander. Okay, so we're looking for underrepresented minorities in the biomedical science field. Okay. These awards provide a stipend, tuition and fees, and an institutional allowance. And they also require that you will have a commitment to do research. As far as eligibility, I said you need to be a member of an underrepresented racial or ethnic group. It is also open to individuals with disabilities, and it is also open to individuals who are from a socially, culturally, economic, or educationally disadvantaged background. Okay, so if you're interested in applying for the F31 predoctoral fellowship, I suggest that you contact the Training and Fellowship Office of the institute you're applying for to make sure that you fulfill the requirements, the eligibility requirements. Okay. The next program that NIH sponsors is a loan repayment program. So the idea here is that after people have taken out all these loans for their undergraduate, their graduate, their medical career, their medical funding, medical school funding, they need to have a lucrative job to pay all those loans back. And a research career is not always the most lucrative path. So in order to entice people to stay in research, NIH offers a loan repayment, and this could be for undergraduate, graduate, or medical school loans. And they repay up to $35,000 a year, but they do require that there is a 2-year commitment to research. And we only support loan repayment in 5 areas, 2 of which are pertinent to this discussion. The first is health disparities research, okay? And the second is clinical researchers from disadvantaged backgrounds. Again, if you're interested in these, I highly encourage you to contact NIH. The third category is a diversity supplement. And this is a supplement to an already funded NIH grant. So unlike the previous two, which go to a regular study section and are reviewed, these grants applications have already been vetted for the science in the peer review by having the parent grant be reviewed and awarded. So these receive an internal review at the level of the institute. And the goal of these supplements is to add a qualified investigator, and this could be from high school through established investigator, who is from an underrepresented minority, comes from a disadvantaged background, has a disability, or is re-entering research after a family obligation. Okay, so we're trying to pull individuals into research with these diversity supplements. And again, contact the program officer who has funded the original grant for more information on how to apply. So now I'd like to talk to you for a few minutes about some specific programs that individual institutes at NIH support. Again, the goal here is to increase the number of underrepresented minorities and to improve our pipeline. Okay. So the first institute I want to highlight is the National Institute for General Medicine, General Medical Sciences. And they have two programs. The first is the MARC, Minority Access to Research Careers. And within the MARC program is the U-STAR program. And here we're targeting the undergraduate population at institutes that are minority serving. And we're trying to cultivate an interest in research at the undergraduate level. Okay? And the idea is that we're trying to prepare these students for high caliber graduate degree programs. The second program is the Minorities Biomedical Research Support. And here we're interested in building research capacity. So this supports institutions that are minority serving to provide core facilities to bring students in to do research. Okay. The next program is housed at the National Institute for Minority Health and Health Disparities. It was formerly at the National Center for Research Resources, which has since been disbanded at NIH. So if you're used to seeing this at NCRR, you now need to move over to NIMHD. Okay, so now we're moving up the pipeline. First we were looking at undergraduates, now we're moving to graduate doctoral level programs. And here we're trying to provide infrastructure to minority serving health schools to, again, promote the attraction of minorities to biomedical sciences and retain them. This program has several components to it, but it includes core facilities, clinical and translational research, research education and career development, as well as a national network. And finally, the National Institute of Neurological Disease and Stroke has two programs that are, again, aimed at increasing the number of underrepresented minorities, and in this case, in neuroscience. So the first is the R25 Diversity Research Education Grants in Neuroscience, and we are looking for again, undergrads to continue them into the PhD level research careers. The second award is a KO1, so we're talking about the Career Development Awards, and these are to promote diversity, again, in the neuroscience research field. And here we're trying to improve diversity at the faculty level. Okay, So this provides the protected time for these individuals to pursue their research career. And then additionally, it also helps them as they advance. So now that I've talked a lot about the different types of mechanisms and the different resources for applicants to NIH, I'd like to talk a little bit about the nuts and bolts of applying. So the majority of NIH research goes to investigator-initiated proposals. We get asked all the time, what is NIH interested in? And we tell them nothing. We are interested in what you want to put forward as a research idea. You are in the lab, you are in the clinic, you know what the research questions are. Okay? So we leave a majority of topic selection up to the individual investigator. Funding decisions are largely driven by the peer review process. If you have the opportunity to participate as a reviewer at a study section, I highly recommend that you participate. You can see how a peer review works. I think that would help you immensely as you prepare your own application. It doesn't matter how much I or any other program officer likes your work if it does not get a good score in peer review. NIH works on a fiscal year, and we have 3 cycles in which we accept grants. All of our grants are electronic submission with very few exceptions. And I always think it's funny that I mention that we take electronic submissions because what don't we do that's electronic these days? But the point in mentioning this is that you need to be registered in both grants.gov and the ERA Commons, which are 2 separate portals, before you apply for NIH funding. And these registrations should be done 6 weeks in advance. NIH does not issue awards to individual PIs. We issue awards to institutions in the name of a principal investigator. Okay, so this registration time allows NIH to verify that an individual researcher is associated with a research institution. From submission of a grant to funding, you need to factor in at least 9 months. And that's assuming that your grant gets a fundable score the first time, which is not often the case. And you will need to factor in time to resubmit. So this is important to keep in mind when you're planning your career progression, okay? And NIH a couple years ago changed our policy on the number of times you could submit a grant. So we can only allow 1 resubmission for a grant. That means you really want to put your best foot forward the first time you apply for a grant. Now, I really like this quote because I think it's very true of how researchers can sabotage themselves when they put in a grant application. So there's no grantsmanship that will turn a bad idea into a good one, but there are many ways to disguise a good one. So I just wanted to finish with some words of wisdom on how to be persuasive when you're putting together your application. Make sure that it is a focused application with explicit goals. The last thing a reviewer wants to do is get to the end of an application and have no idea what you're proposing. Okay. NIH research is generally and has largely been mechanistic based. Okay, so the idea being that we are building a body of knowledge that after you have published your work, other researchers can build on that. And if it's possible to have a mechanistic, and I don't mean that it has to be biological, there are certainly behavioral mechanisms. It is important to include that if possible. Make sure you have a really interesting question that people want to know the answer to, and propose a realistic and direct way to answer it. NIH has reduced the number of pages. An R01 application used to have 25 pages, and now it only has 12 for your research plan. That being said, it is still important that you include sufficient details on what techniques you're using, what are your outcome measures, how do you plan to do your analysis. So you need to give the reviewers enough evidence that you can get the information that you're proposing to get. Keep in mind, we want you to be successful, okay? The reviewers want the research that they review to do well, okay? We want you to do well. In order to succeed, you need to show that you have the appropriate statistical expertise. You have to show that you have established the necessary collaborations. Reviewers don't expect every PI to know everything that they put in their application, but they do expect that you have built the collaborations and the relationships with the expertise that you do require. And finally, if you're doing clinical research, make sure that you describe your subject population, inclusion, exclusion criteria, your power calculations. Do you have a reasonable effect size? Are you taking into account dropout, etc.? There's no point in funding a grant that is not going to be able to collect sufficient data to make any sense at the end. And that's the last thing we want to do. If you're looking at a clinical problem, it's important to put your research in that context. Keep in mind, you're being reviewed by your peers. They know what goes on in the lab. They know what goes on in the clinic. Write in a logical, interesting, readable style. Don't try to cram everything possible onto a page. Don't fuss with margins, and there should be some white space. Reviewers, I hear it every review, I could not get through this application because it was too difficult to read. Okay, you don't want to do that. Okay, so I mentioned that we allow one resubmission, and I do encourage, if you don't get funded the first time, that doesn't necessarily mean that the review group didn't like it or that it wasn't something that they wanted to see again, okay? So you're gonna have to be persistent. When you've gotten your summary statement and you've had some time to digest and you've had some time to talk to your colleagues, call your program officer. It's very likely that they were at the review meeting and that they can work with you. Is there some fatal flaw in this, or is it just really not an interesting proposal and maybe you don't want to put the time and effort into resubmission? Or is it something that if you just put a little more data, you could convince the reviewers, or just answered a few methodological questions? Program officers can help you with that. The time between submissions is also a great opportunity to show that you have continued with this line of research, you've collected more data, you as a researcher have grown, you've gotten more publications out, more experience, etc. And keep in mind that while NIH doesn't guarantee that you will have the same reviewers, it is likely to go to the same study section, and it's likely to be seen by the same reviewers. So take what they say to heart and really try to address their concerns. There's nothing that frustrates a reviewer more to see the same application twice and all the suggestions or the weaknesses that were pointed out in the first submission have been ignored. Okay? And also keep in mind that even if the new reviewers are not the same ones that reviewed the first application, they're still going to see the previous summary statement. So they're going to know these things were brought up and whether or not they were addressed. And with many things, it's all about timing. So when you're building your career path, keep in mind that you may need to add 6 months to resubmit an application into your career plans. I do want to mention a program that NIH has for new investigators, where new is loosely defined as anyone who has not been a principal investigator on an R01 or a P01. A P01 is a program project, which is like several R01s lumped together. Okay. Each institute has its own policy on how they define a new investigator preference. So make sure you talk to the program officer at your institute. But basically, the idea behind this program is that the R01 success rate for new investigators should be the same as established investigators. And this is certainly not the case. So in order to move this bias away from the established investigator, all new investigator R01 applications, this is only relevant for R01s, are grouped together in peer review so that they are being compared with each other. And this allows for a bit more of a supportive review. So things like preliminary data as much may not be expected of a new investigator. You can look at the institutional commitment. Does the institution really stand behind this new investigator, providing them with time, space, etc.? The summary statement is also released faster. So if for career planning purposes you need to resubmit the next round, you have that ability. Now, I don't always recommend a quick turnaround. You may need some time to really think about what the reviewer said, how you can address those weaknesses, but that option is available to you. And then each institute has an extended pay line for their new investigators. So if, for instance, one institute is paying established investigators to the 10th percentile, they may be paying new investigators to the 12th or 13th percentile. Okay? So these are just ways that we are trying to increase the pipeline and funding for new investigators. So I've probably said this about a dozen times in this talk, but you are encouraged to contact NIH. We want to hear from you, okay? But make sure you do your homework first. NIH has a resource called the NIH Reporter, and it has a search engine that allows you to look at all of NIH's funded grants, okay? This gives you a lot of information about the types of research that we are interested in. It tells you what study sections have reviewed that research. It tells you which program officers are associated with those programs. So if you're thinking about applying to NIH, look at Reporter. See where you think you should be based on applications from people who do similar work to you. Send your program officer an email. Schedule a time to talk. We are in and out of our offices frequently, so email is generally the best way to get in touch with us to schedule an appointment. Things that we can discuss. Potential grant mechanisms. Like I said, where are you in your career? Where is the project in terms of length of time, money needed, etc.? We can talk to you about those things. Find the right mechanism for you to apply for. Funding initiatives. I mostly talked about what are called parent announcements. So these are the investigator-initiated, open you select the topic. But there are often requests for applications where a certain amount of money is put aside for a specific topic, and it may be that we have one of those open that is in your area of expertise. We also have program announcements, which are areas that we have identified as requiring more applications, and you can apply to one of those. And then finally, and I think this is one of the most important decisions, is what study section should be assigned. So where and who is going to be reviewing your grant. So depending on the mechanism, it could be reviewed at the Center for Scientific Review, CSR, or it could be done at a review group within an institute. There's lots of different things that can happen to an application as far as where it gets reviewed. So it's important to know if your grant is going to be reviewed by the appropriate group with expertise. And then, as I said, after you've gotten your summary statement, call your program officer and discuss it. And we can help you decide whether this is likely to be funded or not. But again, funding decisions are largely driven by the score you get. So you need to put the best possible application in for review. So I've focused mainly on the NIH opportunities, but we are certainly not the only government agency that funds disability and rehabilitation research. National Science Foundation, CDC, DoD, VA, NIDR, ARC, all government agencies that could possibly fund your research. And then don't forget foundations. So if you're at the beginning stages of your career and you're looking for some money to get some pilot data, these are really, really great resources. So I think with that, I'll conclude. Thank you for taking the time to watch today. And if you have any questions, please feel free to email me. And thank you.